Hi, I'm Laura Sage, and I'm back with you again. And so, as a little bit of a carryover from the last time, let's take a moment to settle in, whether you're standing or sitting, noticing where your body is connecting with the surface, getting a sense of feeling grounded, letting the body relax, and allowing yourself to take a nice, natural, deep breath at your own pace. Allowing you to be present and ready for what we're about to talk about today. So, we are going to be talking about de-escalation. Sometimes when I get requests to talk about de-escalation, the implication is, what do I need to do to de-escalate a student? When in reality, it's almost more of a, who do I need to be in order to de-escalate a student? So we're going to start out with giving some thought to these students that we're thinking about that have a tendency to get to a space that we need to do some de-escalation. Or who do we need to be for that de-escalation? So ahead of the game, before students are at that space, one of the things that we want to think about is all human behavior, whether it's children or adults, is to meet a need. Everything that we do in our lives, every behavior, every action that we do meets some sort of a need that we have. And so what we want to give consideration to with our kids is, when they're doing good behaviors, they are doing that in order to meet a need. When they are doing difficult, dangerous, inappropriate behaviors, they are also doing those behaviors to meet a need. So the beginning piece that we want to give consideration to is, when we have a child who is doing difficult, dangerous, inappropriate behaviors, what is the possible need that they're trying to meet by doing that behavior? Now, the conversation often in schools and education settings comes down to that they want to get attention. And it's very true that sometimes kids do difficult, inappropriate, and dangerous behaviors in order to get attention. Now, we can already break it down into, sometimes it's to get adult attention, and sometimes it's to get peer attention. Two very different needs that they're trying to meet by doing whatever those behaviors are. And it's important that we understand what those needs are that they're trying to meet, because that's how we are better able to assist them in getting those needs met. So the first activity we're going to do in this de-escalation piece is, we're going to pause for a few minutes and have you talk, either in a small group or with a partner, about what are some of the possible needs that you think the students that are having difficult, dangerous, and inappropriate behaviors in your setting, what are some of those needs that you believe they are trying to meet by doing those behaviors? A clue as you're doing this is to make sure that you fill in the blank. They have the need for blank. Sometimes people will say, for example, it's because of frustration. Well, they don't have the need to be frustrated. They may be frustrated because they have a need for understanding that isn't being met, or they have a need for some sort of a choice or a say that isn't being met. And then frustration is the result. So what is the actual need that they're trying to meet that results in that behavior? Take some time to give that consideration with your group. Okay, so now that we've had a conversation around what are some of the needs that kids might be trying to meet by doing difficult, dangerous, and inappropriate behaviors, the background information is to understand that it's not because they don't want to do well. And I'm saying wanna because I'm using Dr. Ross Green's piece, in the sense that Kids do well if they can, not if they wanna. So these needs that they're trying to meet, currently they're using the behaviors that they're using to get those needs met. In many cases, what's going on is they have many lagging skills. They have not yet learned better ways of being able to meet those needs. So as the adults in the education setting, one of our goals is to help kids learn and develop and understand what are the skills that they need or the behaviors that they can learn and use to still meet those needs, but in a way that's appropriate in an educational setting. So at this point, we're going to pause again, and you are going to have a conversation. Maybe think about one particular student that you are noticing is having some difficulty meeting their needs in an appropriate way. Without sharing obviously names with your partner or your small group, think about that student. Think about what you think may be the need that they're trying to meet with the behaviors they're currently using. And think about what are some of the skills or alternative behaviors that they potentially could use to still meet those needs. Pause and give that some thought. Okay, so now that we have thought about what are the needs that they're trying to meet and what are the skills that they are in the process of learning, because by the way, they are children and growing and developing, and even if they're in high school, their prefrontal cortex is not yet fully developed, so they are still in the process of learning skills and better ways of meeting those needs. Now let's talk about our piece in this picture, and this is where I was saying in the opening about what is it that we bring to the table when we have a student who is escalated, and what do we need to do in order to de-escalate them, which really means who do we need to be and what do we need to bring to the table to assist them in becoming de-escalated. It's ourselves. We need to think about what is happening within ourselves. We are not robots. We are human beings. And so when there are situations that are escalated as a human being, we also begin to escalate. As professionals, it is our duty and responsibility to recognize when that is happening and do what's necessary in order to bring ourselves to a place of self-control. So one of the things that we need to recognize is what kinds of things happen in the school settings. What are things that kids say or do or situations that exist that trigger us? What are things that happen that we recognize that we're starting to become triggered? And when we can recognize what the things are, what the behaviors, activities, actions, particular people, situations that we know trigger us and move us away from our own self-control, and we start to recognize things like, what are the signals? How do I feel in my body physically? What are my behaviors and actions that are my clues for myself that I'm starting to move away from my own self-control? We're better able to recognize it's time for us to use our own self-control plan. So our next pause here is going to be to take a moment and share with a partner or a small group, what do we know for ourselves to be triggers? What are things that happen within the school setting that we know trigger us, that move us away from our own self-control? What are some signals in our body? What do we feel and notice? What are some behaviors or actions? What are things that we say or do that can help us catch, like, I'm starting to move away from self-control? So have that conversation to see if you can kind of identify what are some of those triggers and some of those clues that let you know it's time for me to use my plan. So now that we've taken the opportunity to identify what might be some of those triggers and what are some of those clues I can cue into for myself, we need to develop our self-control plan. As educators in the moment, we have technically a few seconds to be able to do something that is going to help us get ourselves back to the place that we need to be, back to our baseline, back to where we're able to think in the way that we need to and say and do things in the way that we need to do to be a professional. So we need to understand for ourselves, what is that plan? For most people in those couple of seconds, taking a deep breath. And in the moment, if you just practice taking a deep breath, physically, it relaxes and calms our body, which includes our brain, which includes what's going to happen with our thinking and our words and our actions. For some people, maybe the deep breath isn't exactly what's going to work for them or what's their comfort level. For some people, it's a sense of grounding. At the very beginning of talking today and having you settle in, I asked you to notice where your body was sitting, where that connection was, or maybe where you were standing, noticing the soles of your feet. The moment that we take that couple of seconds to have that thought of where am I connected, where am I grounded, that also gives us a sense of release in our body and relaxation, which includes our brain, which is then helpful for what we're about to do next. And then for others, it's self-talk. For some people, their inner voice, they're being able to have their kind of pat phrase for themselves. This isn't about me. I can do this. I have this. I care about this student, whatever it is. That's what will bring them to that space and help them to be in their place of self-control. It doesn't matter what it is that you choose for your self-control plan. You figure out what's most natural to you and what works best for you. The point about it is, though, is what you need to do is choose what that is. And then you need to practice doing it and practice doing it often in times of low stress. So if it's take a deep breath, or if it's grounding, or if it's self-talk, many times for that 1 or 2 or 3 seconds throughout the day in times when there's low stress, what you will need to do is practice and do it frequently. Because when you practice doing it, it becomes a part of what's going to automatically happen when you're in times of high stress. Without practicing it during times of low stress, it's not going to just magically become available to you during times of high stress. So important that you practice your self-control plan. So I am going to walk you through a little bit of an activity. See, just kind of humor me, follow along, see what you think if this could help in a situation. So what I'm going to ask you to do, if you are able to, you can either remain sitting, but I'd prefer if it's a possibility for you, if you would stand up just near your seat or wherever it is that you've been. And as you stand up, maybe take a breath, just settle yourself in to this position. And for the rest of this activity, whatever's comfortable for you, you can choose to close your eyes if that's comfortable and you are feeling good about doing that. Or you can simply kind of gaze down toward the ground. That's completely fine too. And as you kind of get yourself settled here, I want you to imagine in your mind a person in your life, and this could be home, work, school, anywhere. A person in your life who is somewhat difficult for you. Now, what I want you to do is don't go to, on a scale of 1 to 10, who is the most difficult person in your life right now. We're not trying to trigger anybody or do a therapy session here. What I'd like you to do is just kind of, who's somebody on a scale of 1 to 10 that's maybe a 4 or 5 difficult, somebody in that middle ground, somebody who says or does things that are, annoying, difficult, but not like the most stressful person in your life at this time. And I want you to imagine that person is here right now, saying and doing whatever it is they say or do that makes them difficult in your life. And as you imagine that, I want you to notice if anything's happening in your body, a knot in your stomach, tension in your shoulders, jaw tightening, warmth in your cheeks, hands. And still imagining them right here, right now, saying and doing whatever it is that's difficult. I want you to think about, what are your thoughts about that person right now? Not saying them out loud. We're not sharing in this activity. This is just our own personal practice. And if you allowed yourself to ride this natural wave of they're saying and doing whatever it is that makes them difficult, your body is starting to do whatever response it normally does, your thoughts are going to that space, what would usually typically be your reaction? What would you be saying and doing back if you ride that wave and just go with it? And maybe that's happened many, many times with this person over and over. And now let's try this again. Understanding that we're looking at this from a place of curiosity, not judgment. We're not making ourselves feel guilty or bad or anything. We're simply exploring and seeing what we can look at from a different way. So here you are, still there. Here's that person that's difficult in your life, same person, saying and doing those things. Imagine it again, get it in your mind. What are they saying? What are they doing? How is your body feeling? And now just take a pause. Either take one slow, deep breath in, ground yourself, do your self-talk, whatever it is for those couple of seconds. And as a result of taking that pause, what would you say or do in response to that person now, having taken that, just those couple of seconds? Or what would you like to say or do? And then be honest with yourself. Do you think that taking that pause just might shift your response? Shift who you're bringing to that space. Shift your curiosity about this person. So thank you. Thank you for taking part in that. So if you'd like to have a seat again or stay standing, whatever it is that you'd like to do. The final thing that I'd like to go over with you in this piece of de-escalation, and obviously that self-control piece was, if you have a student who is escalated and our purpose and intention is to de-escalate the situation, that was an exercise or an activity in how can we bring our energy to a space where we're not adding energy to a difficult situation. When a student is dysregulated, they are not in a comfortable place. It is not a good feeling to be in that space. And when an adult that's interacting with us is also adding to the energy, that makes it even more difficult for the student to be able to bring it down. As well as there's a sense of, as a student, even if they're an older student, that in the back of their minds, they need, who around here has it together? Who's got this? Because I don't right now. Somebody here needs to like be in a space that they've got this. And the more that's the energy and the who we can bring to the table, the better that's going to have a chance at bringing that down. It's a very anxious place to be when there's a sense of like, anybody, nobody. Okay. All right. So finally, let's talk just a little bit about the crisis cycle. The crisis cycle. So baseline, I've referred to that a few times, I think, in the talk today. Baseline is whatever is natural, normal for a person. So there is no description of this is what baseline looks like, because for every single one of us, our baseline looks different. But there's a baseline for each of us as well as for each of our students. It's what's the usual, natural, normal for an individual person. And the thing is, when we're at our baseline, that's when our brains are working at their best. And that means for the students, as far as their learning and being able to do what they need to do in a school day, as well as us as professionals. When they're at their baseline, they're at their best. When we're at our baseline, we're at our best. So the crisis cycle is about the whole point of what we're here to do to help students is to keep them as many moments as possible throughout the day at their baseline, which is where maximum learning happens. So when they are in that place, that's where the brain is online. So a trigger, something happens. It could be immediate, could have been something that happened a couple hours ago, a couple days ago, could be real, could be perceived. Something happens that a student is moving away from their baseline. Our goal, because obviously our goal is to have them at their baseline as much as possible, because that's where learning happens, is to do whatever we can think of or know or connect with this student to do to help support them to get back to their baseline. This is an important place, because at this point, if someone's starting to move away from baseline, it's going to take some time and effort and energy to do that, but they're not like way away from their baseline in the very beginning. So it should be a little bit easier and quicker for us to be able to do that. The trick is, because they're not way away from their baseline, we have a tendency to not either notice or to go, I don't really have time for that, too much else to do. And unfortunately, what sometimes or many times happens is then they get further away from baseline. Now it needs more time, effort, energy, and we really don't have a choice in it when it starts getting to that place. So pay attention to those beginning stages. Really talk with your teams, have a plan with partners, co-teachers, student services staff, whoever it is, of when kids are moving away from baseline, what do we have in place to support them to get back there? If we're not able to provide the proper supports, or just other things are going on that we're not aware of, and they move further and further away from baseline, still our job is to help them get back to baseline. So we're doing what we need to in order to help them maybe calm down or be able to communicate, or whatever it is that's creating that frustration that's moving them away from their baseline. So we continue to support them. If they get to the very top of the crisis cycle being serious danger of hurting self or others, that's a whole new set of what do we need to do as a crisis team, people who are trained, as far as like what might be needed at that point, to make sure that we keep as many people as possible in a safe situation. But the majority of our kids don't get to that point. We have lots of kids who get triggered, so they're kind of away from baseline, they escalate, they get further away from baseline, they do some pretty big, some threatening, throwing things, breaking things, doing all of those kinds of things, but not at a situation where it's a serious danger of hurting self or others. And then they start to come down, they start to recover. So in that recovery stage, they're still pretty far away from their baseline. And our job is still, what do we need to do to support them, to help them to get back to their baseline? Super important we pay attention to that, because some people have the thought that this is the time to start saying, here are the consequences. Here, what are you going to do? You know, maybe restorative thoughts are coming into play. We need to have conversations with you about what happened so it doesn't happen again next time. We're still in recovery, meaning the brain is still not back online because they're not at their baseline yet. That's not the time for any of that. Typically, if we do that at that spot, what happens is they escalate back up. Typically, why people have a hard time seeing us say, maybe if you come into a quiet space and listen to some music, that might help you get to your baseline, or come take a walk with me, or let's get a drink of water, or something along those lines. There's a tendency for people to see that as we're rewarding their behavior that they just did, Well, the point of rewarding means that the brain has to be in a space to learn. And we just said they're not at their baseline yet, and it's not. So what we're doing is supporting them to get them to that baseline, so that eventually when they're in that baseline space for a pretty long period of time, that's when we can have conversations like, what might be consequences? What can we do to restore relationships that may have been harmed or damaged? What are ways that we can make up for things that were, maybe broken, or those types of things? Or let's have a conversation about what can we do differently at a different stage of this cycle so that we don't get to this point. So not saying that it shouldn't happen, just saying that it should happen at the right space. So that is the crisis cycle, the triggers and the escalation. Sometimes kids get to the very top. That's for your crisis team to be heavily involved with. No matter what's the decision of what to do at that space, recovery. And then we get back down to baseline. Baseline being where learning happens. So I hope in all of this that you've heard some solid information about de-escalation, and I would highly recommend that next school year, if you are interested in getting deeper into this and learning more about this, that you may wish to get, that you might want to consider taking PROACT training, which is, this was a very tiny little piece of some of the things that we get into in PROACT training. So, all right, thank you so much for listening, and you know where to contact me if you need help. Bye.